defines a generation. Music is a soundtrack of revolution. Music is a soundtrack of movement. Music is a soundtrack of cause. There is an intersection of politics and pop culture that you didn't even know existed. There's some boy, some girl sitting in a cubicle along K Street, somewhere in DC. A boy, a girl sitting in a cubicle along a hill with a Capitol with a dome who has single-handedly decided what you wore today. Whoa.
Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to the conversation, the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with you all. A happy Saturday. I hope you guys are having an incredible weekend. I hope you guys are doing something fun, as always. I always love hearing what you guys have planned during the weekend, man. Hit me up at I am Mike Muse, M-U-S-N, Sam-E, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, and let me know what you got rocking on this weekend. It's a big NBA playoff weekend. Who you rooting for? Also, too, it's Mother's Day. And happy early Mother's Day to you all. I'll give you guys official Mother's Day greetings tomorrow, but just in case we miss each other tomorrow, I just want to wish you guys all a very happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. You guys do incredible work, including my mom, Jeanette Muse. What's up, Mama Muse? Happy Mother's Day. I'll be talking with you tomorrow, too, as well. Don't worry, Mom. But yeah, happy Mother's Day to everyone that is out there. What a week it has been. I think that's going to be my running theme every time I talk with you guys all on the weekends is what a week it has been. It feels like the week never seems to underwhelm us. If anything, it overwhelms us. And I think a lot of you has become very desensitized to all the whiplash of things that are happening. And it was crazy, man. Not just things that happen in the political space. It's just so much stuff happens in the political space, in the cultural space, that is just a lot to keep up with on a daily basis. But if you've been paying attention this week, this moment was in particular seismic. And not just because of the growing tensions between the two nuclear powers in South Asia that I'm going to be talking with you guys all about, and obviously India and Pakistan. But that's because something transformational happened in Rome. I know you guys know what I'm talking about already. You know that I have been on Pope Watch. You know that I love all things conclave. I love the rituals and ceremony when a pope passes away, from the breaking of the ring to the sealing off of his apartment, all the way to lying him in state, to immediately begin the preparations for a conclave to elect a new pope. And a new pope emerged, and it was not anybody that I was expecting at all. I thought that the Catholic Church would go with someone from the peripheries. That just means one of those countries that is not Euro-based, right? Not part of the European bloc. I thought it would be someone from the Philippines who I was rooting for, or for Ghana, who I was also rooting for. And so I didn't see this one coming. That for the first time in history, the Catholic Church elected an American pope. I mean, talk about plot twist. I don't know if you guys saw the movie Conclave, but if you saw the movie Conclave, there's a big plot twist that happens in Conclave too as well. But they elected a new pope, and he is Pope Leo the 14th, a.k.a. Robert Francis Prevost of Chicago, a.k.a. Rob from the South Side. Pope Leo the 14th has ascended to the throne of St. Peter. But make no mistake, this isn't just about religion. This is also too about race. Yeah, and this is also too about diplomacy. It's about U.S. culture wars. It's about the evangelical power, Black Catholic identity, and even artificial intelligence. I know you guys are like, man, can't sometimes some things just be? But no, in 2025 of our Lord and Savior, things are no longer just able to be and to exist. We just live in such a polarizing society now that everything is viewed through the lens of a choice. I was going to say a binary position on ones and zeros, but I kind of caught myself. I think everything is viewed through a kaleidoscope. And the reason why I think I'm using the words kaleidoscope, because you remember those kaleidoscopes that we used to use when we were younger, and it's just like a myriad of different colors and shapes that are coming together and coming into view. I think that's exactly how everything now gets viewed, is through a kaleidoscope. And all of that is happening against the backdrop of the escalating conflict between India and Pakistan, where new forms of warfare, drones, misinformation, and cyber weaponry, they're changing the rules of international engagement. This isn't the Cold War anymore, folks. It's something far more complex, right? I've also too been talking with you guys over, I would say, the last couple of years about how the theater of war has changed. It's on the cyber front. It's just no longer about, boots on the ground, but rather it's about cyber. It's about attacking individuals, infrastructure, electrical grids, systems that keep society functioning and running. And so this is what makes it also interesting. I can't wait to unpack all of this. And of course, later in the show, folks, I will be joined by the one and only Terry J. Vaughn. Yes, that Terry, actress, producer, director, and now she's starring in her own new show on Netflix, She the People. I saw the trailer drop, and I said, I just have got to have Terry on my show. But before we get into a conversation with Terry, I know she's going to make us laugh and say some really cool stuff, man. I'm just so proud of her, and I cannot wait to see this series on Netflix. If you haven't seen the trailer, man, it is going to be something special. But all right, let's talk about the Pope, though, before we get to Terry. Pope Leo XIV, he was born in the south side of Chicago, but this dude's Pope's lineage, it stretches across borders, oceans, and racial constructs. His maternal family hails from New Orleans' 7th Ward. That is a bastion of Creole Catholic culture, known for its deep roots in African and Caribbean and French spiritual traditions. This is a pope whose ancestry may link to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and the Afro-Caribbean Catholicism, even as his family doesn't personally identify as Black. Now, that's really interesting. There is this dynamic that as Pope Leo's family began to move north, they've changed their racial identities, right? And for so many of you that are listening, obviously that's referring to passing. I don't know what it is, but passing has been coming up a lot lately in conversations, in particular here on the Mike Muse Show. If you guys recall to the town hall that I did with Sinners, first of all, shout out to y'all for rocking with that town hall. You guys loved that conversation with Sinners, and I'm so thankful that you did. It felt special when I was doing the conversation with that cast. It felt very spiritual. I just knew that was going to be something special. But Haley, one of the actors, if you recall, she talked about her experience with racial identity. Because in the movie, I'm not going to give anything away if you haven't seen it, which you need to go see Sinners. I repeat, you need to go see Sinners. Her character is passing in the show. And I talked to her about that because she does have mixed race identity. And clearly when she presents, she is white passing. And so I had the chance to ask her about that. And that also, too, has struck a very interesting social media clip that has happened on social media where you guys and the rest of society cannot stop commenting on this clip. It's very controversial, seemingly, within our community. But nonetheless, I found it very interesting that Pope Leo the 14th, his family has one, Black roots, but then two, made the decision to change racial identity. And so basically what I'm saying is the Pope is Black. But listen, all of that matters in the context of things because for the first time in Catholic history, people across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas are looking at the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and seeing someone who looks more like them. That's a stretch, right? Obviously. But a friend of mine said that she felt that his skin was olive color. And she highlighted that even before we discovered this racial identity. And I think that also too begs to another important question on whether or not is it more important of knowing that there is a racial profile and composition that is reflective of how you show up, how you are viewed externally and how you identify, although externally it may not look the same, right? It's the idea of knowing. Is that more important? Hit me up. I'll be curious about that at I am Mike Muse, MU, S as in Sam, E. Because, a pope whose very existence, disrupts centuries of Eurocentric papal tradition with Pope Leo having roots of the African diaspora. The sense of global belonging is really profound. Pope Leo didn't speak English in his first address, instead choosing Italian and Spanish. He didn't invoke his Chicago roots. He didn't wave an American flag at all. There was absolutely flags in St. Peter's Square that of American flags. The silence did speak volumes, but his message was clear. This papacy is global. It's not national. And I'll be curious to see how are Americans going to really push the nationalism identity on Pope Leo. And also, too, I wonder how are Black folks, are we going to push the Black identity on him, too, as well? But even that choice is political, all right? Because now we have a Pope whose Creole roots and Peruvian naturalizations, because he is a citizen of Peru, are going to challenge the ideological borders, not just of the church, but of global power itself, right? Now let's zoom into the American context of it all, right? The American Catholic Church is undergoing a tectonic shift, and Pope Leo steps into a deeply divided religious landscape. Right. On one side, you have progressives inspired by Pope Francis, that calls for compassion, climate action, and inclusion. And on the other, you've got a rising Catholic right aligned with the political power of the Republican Party and increasingly linked to the evangelical nationalist. There was this conversation before, Pope Leo descended out of that balcony of, how would these College of Cardinals think about their nomination of who's going to be their next pope. Do they continue in the progressive vein of Pope Francis, who recently passed away, who was progressive? Do they go more conservative? Typically there always is an opposite reaction to the new pope, right? If one pope is more conservative, the incoming pope that they select becomes more progressive, and vice versa. But in this instance, it seems like there is some continuation of the lineage of Pope Francis because of the fact of the positions of Leo and how close he was with Pope Francis. And, they have known each other when Pope Leo was just a bishop and before Pope Francis was a pope. But also, too, what was interesting about, I think, Pope Leo is that his previous position within the Catholic Church was to vet all the bishops in order for them to become bishops by Pope Francis. And why that is such an important point I want to highlight is because, he essentially was creating the next leadership of the Catholic Church. By him vetting and recommending bishops, was really putting his stamp on who should be leading the Catholic Church going forward, and what's going to be identity of the church of the future. And so I think that he was thinking about not just the present, but also thinking about the future. There's something about the Catholic Church is such a long tail, right? It's like they look at it from the long view perspective. This is why they typically elect the Pope who's in their 70s. They don't want to have a Pope who's in their 60s because that roughly they live until be about 80 plus years. That could be over 20 plus years of one person's vision of how the Catholic Church should be, and not knowing the ideological positioning of it, right? And what direction would that Pope take the church? And you wouldn't want someone who was in there for like 20 plus years who the majority of the Catholic Church didn't coalesce around the vision that Pope had for the church. So this is what made the selection of Pope Leo such an interesting choice when he walked to the balcony, and why so many individuals were shocked it was actually him. But to really tie this into like the evangelical nationalist movement of the Republican Party, right? A third of President Trump's cabinet is Catholic, right? 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices that we have here in the United States are Catholic. Many of them have backed policies restricting reproductive rights, expanding religious liberties, and reinforcing Christian norms in secular spaces. I was on ABC this week, and I was with 3 other panelists, and they all identified as Christian, and we talked about our analysis of who's going to be the next pope. But after the commercial break, we had a second segment, and the second segment was about immigration, obviously, and potential deportations of immigrants to Libya, which has a very harsh detention centers that United Amnesty has deemed just pretty much a black hole right? And the black site of just complete inhumane conditions. And some of the panelists were enthusiastic in support of sending these migrants to Libya. And I just tied into the idea of, if you're a Christian and you think about this from an agape love perspective, which is the biggest commandment of them all, do you want to be that punitive in punishing individuals without due process, not knowing if it is true or not of the allegation that they made, if you want to put them in such a harsh and hardened detention center versus just sending them back to their countries? And so that's what I think about when I think about compassion. I think about Christianity and how these policies are viewed, and if they're viewed through the agape love. But we're also too seeing, I mentioned ABC, but we're also seeing Catholic media outlets like LifeSite News and Church Militant launch preemptive attacks against Leo the 14th, calling him soft on immigration and even dangerous because of his reports criticizing Trump's deportation policies or his digital support for climate science and gun control. But here's the key. Pope Leo chose the name Leo the 14th, a nod to Leo the 13th. Leo the 13th was known as the Pope of the Workers. In fact, I believe it was 1891, 92, I think it was 91. Leo the 13th authored Rerum Novarum, which was defending workers' rights, defending and advocating for living wages and labor dignity. Again, that was back in like the 1890s. It was a middle way approach, addressing modern inequalities. The choice of a name, isn't incidental. It's thematic. It's calculated continuity with Francis, but with a firmer institutional backbone. Usually, one of the first acts of business is for a pope to select a name, and based upon the name that they select, it usually is going to give some indicator of what is going to be the philosophy, right? The guiding principles, the North Star of this pope. And so by this pope recognizing and choosing the name Leo the 13th, it is a nod that this pope will have the people on his mind, right? This social justice dynamic, right? Living wages, advocating for the workers. That seems to be is going to be a possible theme. So imagine this, Pope Leo quietly opposing Trump's immigration crackdowns while embracing pro-life theology, defending workers' rights while rejecting economic exploitations. He could become a moral foil to America's evangelical political complex, right? Not by shouting, but by embodying a different kind of authority. And let's not forget, right? He is American, and that adds pressure. Every word he says about the U.S. will be parsed by both Rome and Washington. And so I think that is something that we just are not, I wouldn't even say even prepared for, but just entering a new conundrum with the way that President Trump is so active on social media, and that President Trump is not afraid to state his opinion and to attack those he feels are adversarial against him, even in moments that they're not being adversarial. They just have a different viewpoint. For President Trump, he sees that oftentimes adversarial. So the idea that what Pope Leo could do could have impact and strike a response from President Trump, but also to strike a court with Rome, and also to strike a court with other Catholics around the world who didn't want America to be a pope because of the fact that they believe that America is already such a superpower. Will there be enough balance between an American pope, where America has such superpower, and as well as the viewpoint of other Catholics in different countries? So that's something that's going to be really interesting to watch when it comes to that. But I'm excited for Pope Leo. Again, I'm not even Catholic, right? But I'm really always been intrigued by this process and how the Pope is viewed around the world. But speaking of around the world, let's shift back to the world stage, where there's another kind of crisis is unfolding, and that is India and Pakistan. Two nuclear powers are now 3 nights into their most intense conflict, about 4 nights of their most intense conflict since 1971, right? Which started as a brutal terrorist attack on 26 Hindu civilians in Kashmir, has now exploded into airstrikes, drone warfare, and civilian blackouts across both countries. This is huge. This is huge, folks. This is something I couldn't wait to get to the weekend to talk with you guys about. For a couple of different reasons. One, we don't really get a chance to talk about India and Pakistan too much. We don't really talk about them as being nuclear powers. And this is coming at a time where we're just so focused on Russia and Ukraine that we've also too forgotten to really focus on Israel and Gaza, that conflict. But now you're starting to see that dynamic pop back up and intensify. But to see another war and conflict beginning between India and Pakistan, the geopolitical landscape is changing. And again, this is why I keep emphasizing that we must pay attention to geopolitics. And I keep thinking about how you want to create stability in the world, right? There was a time when we didn't have these conflicts. I'm not saying that's not reality, that we exist in this global space where there won't be conflicts current or future, but it's always a good thing when there is such stabilization in the world. When Europe is stable, that is when you get stability amongst the globe. When America is stable in relationship to when Europe is stable, that's when you get a consistency of stability within the world through treaties, through allyship, through partnerships, right? Through different summits and organizations, right, that kind of keeps things in order. If not, you get what we're seeing right now with Ukraine and Russia. You get what we're seeing now between Israel and Gaza, and you get what seemingly is happening now between India and Pakistan, right? And India claims the attackers were part of the Resistance Front, a proxy for Pakistan-based groups. These aren't unknown names. The two groups are Lakshar Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Lakshar was behind the Mumbai attacks in 2008. Jaish claimed responsibility for the 2019 Pulwama bombing. In a response, India launched 9 strikes across Pakistan, targeting mosques, seminaries, and former militant compounds. Pakistan denies responsibilities, calls the strikes unjustified, and says that the death tolls are inflated. India claims that they killed 100 militants. Pakistan disagrees, it says 31. The truth is buried beneath the propaganda and the geopolitical spin, but here is what is different today, folks. Drones. Simple as that. India officials say Pakistan launched 300 to 400 Turkish-made drones into Indian airspace to test defenses. Pakistan denies it. But residents in these different areas have heard the blast. They've seen the skies light up. And they've also, too, lived through total blackouts, reminiscent of 1971. But this isn't 1971, folks. Today, the battlefield is also digital. India has blocked 8,000 accounts on X. Pakistan has long blocked Indian media, and now AI-generated images, deep fakes, sound familiar, folks? And coordinated disinformation campaigns are creating an echo chamber of panic. This isn't just a war for land, it's a war for narrative. What's at stake is civilian lives, global supply chains, strategic alliances, and yes, the risk of nuclear escalation. This moment requires global leadership. And perhaps moral voices like Pope Leo's, may have to speak up, not just to Washington, but to Delhi, Islamabad as well, which is why it's important that America has stable leadership in the Oval Office. And this is what it means when you say the President of the United States is the most powerful person in the world. This week has revealed 2 very different visions of power to me, right? For me, on one hand, we have a world sliding deeper into nationalism, right, religious consolidation, and surveillance warfare. From Trump's America's First agenda to India's militarization to disinformation as a weapon. I always talk about that. Disinformation is a weapon. On the other hand, we have a newly elected pope whose very existence is a challenge to that model. A Creole American Spanish speaking bridge between countries, sa passe, cultures, and faith traditions. A man shaped by labor, migration, and global Catholicism, not just Roman authority. right? And so when you think about this, folks, in this fragile moment, that contrast couldn't be more urgent. Because this isn't just a battle for control. This is a battle for what kind of leadership defines the 21st century. Will it be authoritarian and exclusionary, or will it be pluralistic and moral? Right? Get into that. That's the question that Pope Leo XIV steps into as he begins a new week on Monday. That is what he will be navigating. Right? But that being said, folks, let's take a breath and celebrate something joyful, powerful, and deeply personal. Join me after the break as my guest, the incomparable Terry Vaughn, will be here. I just cannot wait to unpack and have some fun with her. She's just super dope. I can't wait. Literally just cannot wait. So grab a snack, as they say, and come on back. Look forward to talking to you guys on the other side of the break. All right. Talk to you in a minute.